Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining the week 2 series of Talking Tech webinar. Today, we're going to cover ZTNA and microsegmentation again, but we have a little bit of an industry panel this week as teased from last week. So we have, as always, myself. We have Sean joining us again from Akamai. But this week we have Robert joining us from AppGate. So I know, Sean, if you want to briefly introduce yourself for anybody who was on last week, I know they got the introduction, but Sean, if you want to briefly go over that. And then Robert, if you want to give yourself a little introduction here.
Sure. And Chris, just thank you for having me. Yeah, Sean Flynn, I'm Director of Security Technology and Strategy at Akamai. Been with Akamai for 12 years, been in security for 20. What I typically do on a day-to-day basis is talk to security thought leaders within companies to understand the challenges that they're facing, and then go back to my product team and make sure that we're meeting those challenges, and not just the challenges of today. I think the real trick is also at this stage understanding the challenges that are going to be experienced in the future. So understanding the technology as companies start to migrate to new technology, as well as the ever-evolving threat landscape.
Thank you, Sean. And Robert, you want to give us a little background on yourself and AppGate?
Certainly. So myself, my name is Robert Ungemach. I've been in and around the industry. I kind of predate VPN, so I've been around for quite a bit. My background, I come out of the military. That was one of my first gigs in intelligence as an analyst, and that really led into everything else from that point on. I'm heavy. My background is very, very heavy into network infrastructure and architecture. I was part of the teams that built some of the first cloud resources in the world, which was fascinating. And I brought that to AppGate. I got a call from them. They spun out of Cyxtera in 2020, right in time for the pandemic. The platform itself has been around for about 18 years. We've been called out as one of the most mature ZTNA platforms in the industry today because of our extensive background. One unique thing about AppGate is that it is our only product that we sell. We have one product in the industry, and we work our darndest to make sure it's the best product in the industry. We feel it that way. But anyways, so yeah, looking forward to the conversation today. SDP, software-defined perimeters, and ZTNA is the core of what we do. So looking forward to the questions that we have today. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I guess I was going to take a moment to go over a little bit of what we talked about last week, but I would say actually before we even get into that, I know we've had some conversations around this. This is an interesting industry panel for me. You guys are not necessarily direct competitors, but at some level, your two solutions work together. Do you guys want to take a brief moment to talk about like how you guys both cover north-south, but east-west as well? I know, Robert, you guys, AppGate, have a strategic partnership with another vendor that does east-west microsegmentation very well, but also you would work with the Guardicore product, Sean, that you alluded to last week that's offered by Akamai as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Sean, did you want to start, or I can jump in either way?
You want to go ahead and start?
Sure. So AppGate really, its core focus. So we came out of the software-defined perimeter workspace, and actually our chief product officer was a co-chair on that workshop for the Cloud Security Alliance. So it's a product that's been near and dear to our heart. And the primary alignment from a zero trust network access perspective in an SDP world is really focusing on the north-south and microsegmentation from that point of view. In this world today, marketing does take a precedent. It takes terms that we use every day in the industry and uses them to make connections. And a strong connection from a microsegmentation perspective has always been east-west inside the data center. From an infrastructure perspective, that's been something that I've worked on for years. And it's a challenge, making sure that you've got segmentation in the data center, because initially a lot of platforms were rolled out, a lot of data centers were rolled out in a very flat network deployment. But as we learned through experience, through various different breaches and operations, that segmenting it out from an east-west perspective and limiting communication between devices when necessary is very important. It helps eliminate that spread when something does happen inside the organization. I've been around for those various worms that spread like wildfire, just crazy things. And so it's been developed over the time. AppGate, by focusing north-south and providing microsegmentation in that aspect, really complements that east-west deployment. That's why we complement so well, whether it's Guardicore, whether it's Illumio. We take a very agnostic approach to just those principles. So really focusing, eliminating that blast radius when something does happen, because we all know the reality is something will happen eventually. So putting yourself in a position where you embrace principles of least privilege, where you embrace role-based access controls, where you're controlling what the user has access to based on what they're doing, and the device health and security health of the device that they're connecting in with makes a huge difference. And then on top of that, AppGate, on top of it, a platform like ours provides also what we use as a single packet authorization to really cloak the appliances and the resources that are protected by a platform like ours. Unique in the industry today, but it's a great complement with platforms like Guardicore and Illumio.
So I guess when it comes to Akamai, we were the first content delivery network back in 1998. And then our customers came to us and said, hey, you guys are in a perfect position to help with application issues when it came to security. So we went from having the very first cloud-based web application firewall to now having over 20 different security products. And about 10 years ago, we were talking to customers and they were saying, hey, you're doing a great job blocking my applications when it came to kind of that application firewall, but what about my employees? And so we looked at enterprise security and helping with the data flows that are more of a challenge outside of the application side, which is the data flows east and west, as well as the employee data flows north and south. Through several acquisitions and a lot of engineering work on our side, we took the position of trying to provide a platform that's flexible enough to be able to provide zero trust network access, as well as Guardicore, as well as multi-factor authentication, secure web gateway capabilities, but also be flexible enough so that if you're not wanting to use the entire platform, if you're looking to use Guardicore and something like an AppGate, absolutely do that. Have the flexibility to do that. I think really when we focus on Guardicore, the idea is flexibility. Because microsegmentation has had such a reputation of being rigid, trying to do it through network-based appliances, we're taking a different approach, which is being able to do cloud environments, hybrid environments, data center environments, and being able to work with your favorite vendors when it comes to other parts of your network security.
Yeah, thank you both for kind of that introduction and how you guys could complement each other. I want to make sure, I know some of the other industry panels that we've had, there are definitely vendors that specifically compete with each other in the same space, and you guys are a unique situation from that perspective. You're actually, I would say, more complementary than competitive in the especially in the ZTNA journey or the ZTNA architecture that customers may be trying to achieve. So with that, we'll kind of just go back to just touch on what we talked about a little bit last week. So, we kind of got into, well, what is zero trust? It's the process of obfuscating the apps and services from discovery and authorized access only to specific applications. The ZTNA lowers the impact of the breach. As you said, Robert, really minimizes that security risk. So that kind of outlines what would occur with ZTNA or in a ZTNA architecture. And then, Sean, I know we got deeper into that in terms of microsegmentation and just discussed how that's a technique for segmenting the network at generally the application layer, sometimes the protocol layer as well in a ZTNA or microsegmentation. But we also talked about the fact that it's a key milestone last week on that chart that we looked at in terms of your steps to a true zero trust network architecture.
Yeah.
And I know last week I had a little teaser slide about who was going to be involved this week from a speaking engagement perspective. But we kind of get into who can help out here with some of those items. And so just these are just a few of the vendors that we have in our portfolio that deal with either ZTNA or microsegmentation. This gets into a little bit of CASB maybe as well, but just some of these vendors, so Akamai, Cloudflare, AppGate, Cato Networks, Perimeter 81, they can all do portions, if not the complete bundle of ZTNA. I think as we talked last week, I want to make sure, everybody kind of understands the fact that ZTNA isn't necessarily a single product that we go buy. It's not like we pull the big box computer application off the store shelf and say, look here, I've got ZTNA now. It really is a complement of applications. It's a mindset. It's an architecture and framework to work towards. And there are dots along that road or dots along that map that really you could slot in. I don't know, probably in the whole ZTNA architecture, you could easily slot in 100 different vendors. Certainly, I wouldn't recommend that. It might be a little cumbersome for people to manage. It might be a little painful for people to manage in that infrastructure or that type of environment. But certainly, every step of the ZTNA journey, you could potentially dot with a new logo. However, some of the people here just handle more portions of that ZTNA journey. Akamai handles that with their other aspects, including their SSO solution and things like that. Robert, you from AppGate, you guys handle that with that obfuscation layer that we talked about for the brokering servers and offering that kind of SDP, that classic VPN replacement as we discussed. And Cloudflare, Cato Networks, Perimeter 81, they all do similar things, fall into those same slots. So, with that, it is an industry panel. So we've got some industry questions here that I want to ask you guys, and it's just kind of free form. Feel free to answer. So the first is, and we just kind of got into this. So what role does north-south microsegmentation play in a ZTNA architecture?
Yeah, I'll jump in, and Sean, you probably had thoughts on this as well. We look at it from a couple different aspects, but reducing it down to the technology and how that function plays into the real world. So we use a term called universal ZTNA to really promote those controls in everyday life from a user's perspective and from a company perspective. So that, as you've mentioned, quite often it gets stuck into that VPN replacement, which is a great way to get into zero trust. That's a great low-level fruit. Just replacing your remote access platform that you've been using for years and going into a ZTNA platform is a huge win for an organization. And it's just a step on that journey. But north-south microsegmentation really has an important aspect to play in this. And everybody has a little bit different way to put it into play. So AppGate's view, we use a different protocol. We use things a little bit differently. We use mutual TLS sessions between the endpoints and the gateways. And we chose that on purpose because it allows us to get very granular in the connectivity analysis for when a user requests access to a platform. So each connection, as opposed to a VPN where it's a giant tunnel, each connection is evaluated from a north-south perspective to compliance, to conditions, so that if you need to check risk on a device, or if you need to check risk on a platform, or if you need to check to make sure the user's priority process or service is done, each individual connection gets checked individually on that north-south relationship. And the users are not able to see left and right. They only have access to the things that they need in real time to do their work. Everything else stays dark, which is that core principle of least privilege that we've been talking about. I think I mentioned April of 1973 was the first time principle of least privilege was mentioned in the industry, and we're still talking about it today. And I like to use that term along with ZTNA and role-based access controls or attribute-based access controls, because that brings it into the world we've been living in. That north-south allows something to be isolated. Users don't have access. They don't have overprivileged access left and right. So if something does happen, and in the real world, we're people. We make mistakes. I think right now we're averaging globally about 85% of breaches are human caused. People are people. People make mistakes. So we need to build platforms that can handle that when it does happen, minimizing that blast radius so it doesn't move left and right, so it doesn't have elevated access and privileges into applications and targeted hosts, really locking things down from that north-south perspective. And then taking a look at your east-west when you go into that mode and looking how you can secure that and partnering up with a partner that does that work so well.
Yeah, I'll kind of I agree with 100% with what you said, kind of taking it from a different angle. You know, when we talk about microsegmentation, a lot of what I would talk about would be software-based, because that's the solutions that we're supporting. Software-based changes things because it's at an application layer. So it's going to give you additional visibility into what the network's doing. It's also going to be able to allow you to understand where are your applications reaching out to. So a lot of what we think about with Zero Trust Network Access is bringing the employee into the right application. I think the other side of that, though, is making sure the application is reaching out to environments that you trust as well. So are they going to just their update servers, or are they going to other specific areas? Can you control that as far as where they're going? And you can do that. I think there's definitely some overlap as far as microsegmentation and Zero Trust Network Access. But I think a lot of it is, I mean, it really boils down to access. Microsegmentations allows you to see the access, the visibility that the applications are doing, where the servers are going, where your laptops are going. But in addition to that, also prevent unwanted access into things like applications and your crown jewels. So I think they play well together, but I also think that it really changes visibility. Once you have visibility into what your network's doing and where they're reaching out to on the internet, it allows you to be a lot more confident when you have to make calls as far as blocking or whether or not you're gonna cut down on access because something has a vulnerability and you want to prevent it from being exposed to the internet.
Absolutely.
So I guess that jumps into our next question, which kind of has a similar answer to what maybe you guys said before, but what role does the east-west microsegmentation play in the ZTNA architecture? And Sean, I guess you're probably the better one to maybe start this one off, and it kind of piggybacks off of what you previously said.
Yeah, I was just this definitely walks right into what we were just talking about, right? And again, it comes down to granularity, right? Zero Trust Network Access is all about granularity and making sure the right people are accessing the right applications. And we can do that with the employees when they're coming in. But the other piece of microsegmentation is assuming breach. It's assuming that maybe they did get in and maybe they didn't get in the way we were expecting it to get in. Maybe it was a vulnerability with an application, or maybe it was a link from a phishing site. So east-west microsegmentation allows you to limit access overall. So you can say only, which is very different from I think what we typically think of, which is we want to make sure the right groups get to the right applications. But how about we can try to change that to say only those groups? So east-west microsegmentation actually allows you to, at least at a software-based level, allows you to create rules that say only these users get in, and only with these ports and protocols, or only hitting with the right multi-factor authentication and things like that. So it's almost like taking the other side of it, which is assume breach, and let's make sure that only those employees, or the right employees, are getting to it, and everybody else is blocked and locked out of it.
Yeah. No, exactly. And it is a great way to look at the environment holistically too, which I think is equally important in this conversation. It's part of that journey, understanding the environment, how your company functions. What we have found, and AppGate doesn't always take a look at it from physical people inside the environment or connecting in. We also look at things as well. And so in AppGate's world, we often talk about endpoints and resources being very universal. So in AppGate's world, we also look at north-south from, for example, a web application server connecting out to a database. AppGate looks at those type of connections as well from a north-south perspective. Some may relegate those to an east-west conversation, but what happens in most enterprises today is that the servers and application hosts have identities as well inside these environments. They have roles to play inside the organization, and principle of least privilege can be applied to those platforms as well. So AppGate does work in that area. It's not a targeted east-west microsegmentation platform, but we take it from a north-south approach as well. And the benefits, whether it's a platform like Guardicore, Illumio, or whoever is working in the data center, one of the things that I have found is that both the application of north-south microsegmentation, east-west microsegmentation has huge operational benefits for the organizations that head down on this journey. What we see is a reduction in connectivity trouble tickets. There's some really good benefits. We see things lighting the load on understanding in the firewall rule sets, the ACLs that have to be applied into data centers, putting platforms in like Guardicore and partnering up with AppGate so they can exchange information can reduce that load on the IT staff as well, which are huge and not even part of where we're going in this conversation. There's so many benefits from this journey. I wanted to drop that in as well.
And Sean, I think there's something that's an interesting benefit that maybe I don't know that we really touched on last week. A lot of when I have conversations, a lot of the conversation in that ZTNA microsegmentation type architecture starts off with, blocking access at a application level. But you touched on something really incredible there, which is let's look at an incident that probably everybody is all too familiar with, like a log4j. Everybody was working backwards to try to patch that vulnerability in real time to try to protect their infrastructure and their environment. But with something like, some of the applications, some of the ZTNA microsegmentation solutions that we're talking about here, whether that's Guardicore or others, potentially what you're seeing there is the vulnerability gets flagged and then it's in real time blocking that from going on. So, not saying that it doesn't need to be patched, but now there's not this emergency patching cycle, which, let's be honest, everybody knows emergency patching cycles tend to lead to other unforeseen issues that occur in the environment after the fact. Yep. Also, historically, calling out Microsoft here, that print spooler driver, how many times did we have to try it before we got it right type of situation? They patched it and there was a new vulnerability opened up when they patched it. And then that happened a second time. And it took 3 patches to get that right. So in that situation, that's where some sort of that east-west microsegmentation really does shine, is rather than saying we've got to patch this now, we've got to do emergency patching, we have to take systems down to get this cleaned up. We're saying, well, we can patch this, we can put this on the schedule, but for now we're going to block the vulnerability at the microsegmentation level so that we don't need to worry about these systems being patched up or not.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the trends, I think there somebody counted 91 different 0 days last year. And the reason for that is because there's so much of a focus. And if you look at some of the largest ransomware attackers out there, they're focusing on 0 days. That is how they get into an environment. And what we saw within, the attack traffic that we monitor, we see about a third of the World Wide Web kind of goes through Akamai. We see that within less than 24 hours of the exploit being released, attackers are kind of jumping onto it. So in the idea of, there's a vulnerability, we have days or weeks to fix it. It's a different environment now. That might have been true a while ago. It's not true now. So the speed as to whether how fast you get a security control in between your vulnerable asset and the rest of, ideally the rest of the network, but also the internet is critical. So having a solution where you can do something like an OS query to say, hey, the log4j example was, hey, let me do a query to see which of my assets have log4j. And the benefit of that is that it's able to do that within minutes versus trying to do it manually, which I think a lot of companies try to do. And then God forbid if there's somebody running a server under their machine that's running it and that's available to the network. I think we've all kind of run into that, right? So being able to do that, and then once they respond back, yes, I'm vulnerable, to be able to create a security perimeter around, just create a map just for those devices and say, okay, you're not allowed to go out to the internet now. And I can do that within minutes versus this idea that, gosh, I've got 100 vulnerable servers. How fast am I going to put them? How fast can I actually implement patching? And what am I going to do in the meantime? That meantime is critical. So having some security control, whether it's web application firewall, whether it's microsegmentation, really kind of depends. But ideally, that really makes it quick for you to be able to implement that solution and protect you, again, within that 24 hours versus days or weeks. And unfortunately, I've seen companies that took months to be able to resolve the issue.
So guys, I have some other questions, but we had a question come in from the audience that I think is a good one to talk about. And the question was, if you have those microsegmentation in place, does it make it more difficult to detect those features through testing methods?
And by testing methods, are we saying like doing scans on your overall environment, or I guess it kind of depends on to get clarification on that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
great. No, because I mean, obviously, if you're going to do scans, you're probably got to have a specific asset or a specific certain IPs if you're doing it from outside that you can whitelist to. And it's a simple, think of it almost like I hate to simplify this down to a firewall rule, but it really can be that way as far as, I mean, everybody understands what a firewall rule is, so that's why I'm going to go there. But the idea to say, okay, I will allow access from this asset that its job is to scan all of my assets, or I'm doing a pen test and I do want to allow this particular operator to come in and be able to access that. I think that's a little bit more on the rarer side, but obviously internal vulnerability scans, I see that as a necessity. So all you do is you just basically whitelist that particular appliance and you're good.
Yeah, I would agree. I see this as the same way we would do any other sort of pen testing arrangement. We're either turning off security controls from the IP address that the pen tester vulnerability scan is originating from, allowing it through those whitelisting rules, like you said. But generally, you would allow that or create rules in your microsegmentation policy to say, hey, this host, we want it to scan. It's the same reason we give credentials to a vulnerability scanner, because we want to know what it could do if it would find them.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And it's very similar too, even from a north-south perspective, from a pen test coming in from the outside, the first thing that's always tested in our platform is our software, our single packet authorization, cloaking the appliances, and they shouldn't be getting any responses. So the first case is always they want to scan those ports those IPs where they know the appliances are sitting. And then quite often they'll roll back partially the single packet authorization to expose those ports temporarily so they can confirm that the appliances are there. And that's from the outside in. There's other ways that AppGate works in that aspect too. You can open things up. You can allow things temporarily. You can allow roles, and then you can close them up when your testing is done. So very different, very solid concepts in how you can approach those tests and how you can modify things temporarily for those. We could run into that quite often.
Yeah, so the next question that I have from the panel questions is, how does a vendor with a global edge platform enhance ZTNA and microsegmentation offerings? I know, Sean, I'll kind of probably let you take this off, because I definitely know this is more geared towards an Akamai. And then Robert, from your perspective, I know that could technically be built out with your platform, but maybe if you would like to talk about how your platform can be built upon, and you really, it's a difference of acquire edge through your vendor or build your own edge, so we can kind of have that dichotomy of conversation here with this question.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think a lot of what we've been talking about are security benefits, but the things that we also need to keep in mind is that you obviously don't want a solution that's going to cause too much friction or unnecessary friction. And part of that could be a performance issue, right? So when we think about disaster recovery, resiliency, think about performance as far as, you don't want to remove your VPN that took you 5 seconds to get in for a solution that takes you 15 seconds to get in. That's not going to make you popular. So making sure that, an edge platformer that allows you to increase your performance and make sure that the company that you're using has points of presence wherever you are, but is also wherever your end users are, and that could be global in many instances. So being able to reduce that travel time between somebody who might be in Europe to come all the way over to the US, if there's a point of presence that can make it faster, if you've got it in Europe, for example. So it's all about performance. It's about scalability. It's about resiliency. Multiple points of presence versus a couple of servers in Virginia, for example, is going to allow you to have better uptime, allow you to have better performance, and allow you to have a better user experience. And I know that a lot of times with employees, you go, it's an employee user experience. I mean, they're kind of an isolated, they're going to do whatever we tell them to do. But at the same time, that also can mess with how efficient they are and how productive they are. So you don't want something that's going to stand in the way with employee productivity. So I would say it's all about performance and resiliency.
Yeah. No, you're spot on. I think, it's interesting because the different companies out there, the number of zero trust and zero trust network access platforms that have come into the industry over the last 4 years is amazing. And there's probably I think the largest core difference between the functionality or the connectivity between our platform and mostly everybody else's is AppGate takes a direct routing approach as opposed to leveraging POPs and cloud routed platforms. So we're a little bit different in the industry in that we're a security overlay on top of an existing network infrastructure that an enterprise has already deployed. So what that means is there's not a rip and replace, there's not major changes in routing because we sit on top of that existing network infrastructure. And then from there, the company is allowed to make good choices on what they may decide to change. For example, we have a global company with 750 branch locations around the world that deployed AppGate, and within a period of about 8 months determined that they could decommission the SD-WAN platform that they've been paying for along with the MPLS circuits and go to direct internet access to solve a lot of their problems. Huge ROIs on that, streamlined things. And without that intermediary, they didn't have to worry about POPs. They didn't have to worry about location differences between employees and where they can get into the system. So very different concept there. That allows us to do things and not impede productivity or impede workflow. It's very responsive from platforms that deploy voice because of the direct connectivity that we provide in those areas as well. So there's a lot of different things, and it needs to be a matchup between the enterprise that you're working with and the benefits that the platform brings to the table. And not every platform works for every enterprise and every customer out there. We recognize that. And so that we often guide through thought leadership, the right decision-making process for the platforms that they're going to deploy. But we found that things that we've incorporated over the last 18 years into our platform, selecting the nearest site. We have a global company that needs their employees connected to the closest site for working in locations. So we built that into our platform. We can do that over the internet through our secure connectivity and secure access, and provide those fast connections. Because what we found, and you'll find when you work with our platform, is that we focus on end user productivity. We focus on the user's performance and how that impacts their work, because that's a very strong factor in long term, whether or not the organization is going to stay with that platform. So user productivity increases is something actually we measure as a metric after the fact on deployments. That's very important to AppGate, and it's also in the core of some of our design and our build as well.
Yeah. So I think we've kind of really dug into the fact that the microsegmentation and the ZTNA architecture is really a push that we're seeing in the industry. So let's kind of pivot and talk about, okay, we know this is great. We've implemented it. Now what? So, the next question is, what are some key considerations in the ZTNA microsegmentation solution as it relates to scalability? So we've got it in, or we're getting ready to put this in. How does this work in an environment when we have to scale it?
Mm-hmm.
So, Robert, I'll let you go first.
Sure. So AppGate's an interesting I don't always like to come back. I want to be more industry specific, but our platform is a software platform. We leverage virtual machines, and we're also cloud native, which is where most of the world is today, whether it's private cloud or public cloud. And so we take advantage of the tool sets that are already built into those platforms for auto scaling, for example. You can pick a metric that is appropriate for your platform. You can scale it out horizontally. We also, as needed, and scale back when it's not needed, based to conserve resources. So that's a huge win inside of our platform. The other thing that's really nice about AppGate, because we're not tied to a specific hardware platform, is our ability to work across different connectivity types. So maybe you're starting with a branch office with gig, but you've got 40 gigs inside your data center. AppGate works universally on those platforms. And because we leverage mutual TLS and we don't leverage the bulky protocols that typically consume a lot of resources, AppGate's a very distributed platform. It's highly resilient because of the way it distributes the control plane and the data plane and allows users to connect directly to data centers where the resources are located. And that's really part of how the client itself is built. It has a multi-tunnel adapter built into it. So a user becomes the center of a hub and spoke environment for them, directly connected to data centers where they have resources that are needed. If you think about that, I remember a previous job. I worked for a large, huge public cloud company. And when I live in Dallas, and when I would log in the morning, I logged into the West Coast because it had the least utilization. And by noon and by lunchtime, I would disconnect from the East Coast and connect to, I'm sorry, from the West Coast, and then connect to the East Coast as people would be signing out for the day. I moved my connection intentionally to get the best performance. And scalability is huge. When you need to rapidly scale up for a specific project, whether it's scale up for your enterprise growth, whether it's scale up for adopt or integrating zero trust into a new division as part of that journey methodology. We always say start small and then scale up in your deployment. And it really takes a good partner to be able to do that with you. We see companies deploying 5,000 users in a week on our platform so they can scale quickly if they need to, but always start that small. I preach crawl, walk, run every day to our channel partners because that's such an important methodology. Learn the platform, start small, do your crawling, pick out one targeted deployment, and then start expanding exponentially. And from a partner perspective, that's a great way to go about this as well, because it creates long-term clients for you and customer base as well. So,
yeah, I see scalability in a couple of different ways. I mean, first, the obvious thing with this is a lot of times this isn't you replacing a firewall. This isn't you replacing an IDS or just taking a, something out of a server rack and plugging it in. This is you moving usually to a newer technology and getting all of your end users to adapt to it. So it's not something that you really want to change out in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. So when we think about scalability, yes, you want it to scale to your growth, but also where you're going in the next several years. So you might be in the data center now, but you're going to be scaling out to the cloud. Can your solution that you're looking at, can it also go to the cloud? Can it be hybrid? Can it be all cloud? Depending on your goals for where you want to take your technology, you want to make sure that you're scaling not just the amount of end users that are using it. Obviously, that is critical, and using solutions like Akamai is which is enterprise based. Scalability is top of mind, but we also look at it from are we going to be able to support you within your journey, not just your not just your zero trust journey, but your development journey and where you're going with your architecture. Also, a lot of times you're going to be working with vendors that because it's not that easy to replace, you're going to be also looking at those vendors for other things. What are they also able to provide you feature-wise? And as you grow into those solutions and you're going to start to ask more and more of those solutions, are you getting a solution that is able to grow with you or have what you need so that as you're growing into it and as you're becoming more security mature with those solutions, that they'll be able to provide and continue to provide those things that you're going to be looking for? Because at this point, and Robert, I think you mentioned it, it's about partnership. It's not about being a vendor. It's about being a partner where you're going to be able to continue to provide the solutions that they need as they grow into the direction that they're going, both technology and security maturity.
Exactly.
So these next two questions, we'll kind of just run quickly through them because there's a couple other questions that I want to get to in this list, and we're getting there on time. But I think we've already really touched on these next two. So can you explain your approach to microsegmentation integration with existing infrastructure and cloud environments? We kind of already touched upon that in the way that it can be a layered on service. Robert, you talked about that crawl, walk, run, small deployment. And then we also talked about, you just said, Sean, how this isn't there to replace kind of the classic firewall layer 7 type devices that we've talked about. It's there as a supplement to security, not as a replacement for a previously existing security and technology. And I think everybody on this call would agree, depending on how you phrase it. I've heard it in the industry phrased a handful of different ways, but I generally would say like security, like like the layers of an onion. It is just one more layer in that onion that can help keep us protected. And if one of those layers just so happens to be pierced, then we have other layers on top of that.
Correct.
The next question is, how does the microsegmentation improve network security compared to traditional firewall-based segmentation? Again, I think we've probably beat a dead horse on this one in terms of how it handles and covers that, again, with this policy-based. But to the next question, the one that I really wanted to get to is, what is the ROI of implementing ZTNA and microsegmentation compared to other solutions in the marketplace? I know, there are definitely some straightforward ones that we've talked about. If I'm replacing a VPN solution, then obviously that is a one-for-one replacement from an ROI perspective. But Sean and Robert, what else have you guys seen from an ROI perspective in this? And maybe not just the ROI on products, but also the ROI for people, time investment in from security teams and infrastructure staff as well.
Yeah. So the first thing I think of with ROI is how fast can you implement it? I've dealt with companies that have said, hey, we're in year 2 of the contract with X company, and we're still in the process of implementing the solution. Well, if you're still in the process of implementing the solution, you're not getting any ROI. So I think speed of implementation is tied directly to return on investment. And so when you're looking at solutions, you want to be looking at solutions that are, and I would say not just talking to the security partner / vendor, but it helps talk to companies that are using that vendor to understand how fast were they able to get up and running. Microsegmentation, ZTNA, that gets really into the roots of your network. And so it's not just something you can turn on. That requires some integration. So how fast can you get these things up and running? That's the first thing. I think that's when you start to get ROI as soon as you're up and running. And unfortunately, I've seen too many solutions where it's taking years to get up and running, and that's not helping. Then obviously the other side is, can it reduce your overall burden on your security team? Does it make it easier for you? I think we talked about, hey, I can do an OS query on a 0 day. Well, that obviously is going to give you a lot more ROI than you having to go and try to figure out with all your developers where this process is. So how fast and how many, the level of effort before the solution to solve a problem, and then the level of effort afterwards. And I can definitely tell you that, like, once everybody's up and running with Zero Trust Network on access, and Robert, I'm sure you will agree, it usually means that it's usually faster to get somebody up and running that might be a new user than it is to do a VPN. So a lot of times it's speed of integration, but also reducing the teams needed. If I can make it easier for somebody to solve a problem with one person versus 4, then that's really where we're going. And I think things like machine learning, which is definitely something that is utilized in microsegmentation, understanding what's normal traffic so it can identify anomalies. That's something that's huge for ROI that you might not be thinking about when you think of segmentation. But once you get that visibility and you add that visibility to machine learning, it's huge, and it's going to reduce the level of effort for you to identify issues and also to solve them.
Yeah, no, great points, Sean. I try to remind partners and customers when I talk direct to customers as well that, Zero Trust as a program is really large, and we don't eat that entire apple or elephant in one bite. We're talking about looking at and finding ways to remove implicit trust throughout the entire environment. That's really one of the core principles of what we're talking about. So AppGate's philosophy, we talk about it, well, start where you are today, accelerate your path forward and advance maturity. So things to consider on the Zero Trust journey that we talk about quite often is unlocking integrations. We all I was an IT manager for a large financial services organization. And it always frustrated me because I would buy platforms that I knew were multi-use and had multiple capabilities, But quite often we purchased a platform with one targeted use and never fully realized that ROI in that environment. NAC, for example, was a frustrating one, a 2.5-year deployment that we never completely finished. It happens. PAM solutions and so forth. Unlocking integrations to existing platforms that you've invested in that you use every day is a huge win. In a platform that has an open API that can exchange information in real time and leverage those platforms. For example, thinking about enterprise architecture and zero trust, could you imagine if the system that you were using for ZTNA actually reported GeoIP coordinates for a platform so it could be read into the PAM platform to verify the user is who they say they are and where they're coming in from exactly where they should be coming in from? Think about automating dynamic access. Companies that take the onboarding process and integrate that throughout the entire platform. Again, using platforms that are intelligent, that have API integration, capability to talk to other platforms, and input additional sources of truth that you've invested in over time in that enterprise is always a huge win. Dynamic access, so that users that may need temporary privilege elevation, those can be elevated automatically through a support ticket that's opened by the user for a temporary project assignment. Think about the hours that would be spent on firewall, VPN access, and any other changes that need to be made for a single user to have temporary access for 30 days to a platform, and then remembering to pull that out. Equally important as well. And then last, reviewing and retiring legacy equipment. Not only may some stuff be pulled out, but maybe it's time to consider downsizing what you've done before. When you have a zero trust deployment, especially in ZTNA, it's almost like, I'll go back to my network roots. We have internet routers at the border, at the edge, to do main filtering on that pipe that's coming in. A lot of times rely on services like Akamai to do even better filtering than we could do at the edge. So at that point, you're taking and narrowing the focus down into your firewall segment, into your load balancers, so that by the time it comes down, you have trusted people. Think about having a platform like ZTNA that is doing the same thing for all of your users everywhere, so that the information that's actually inside is stuff that you filtered and only coming from things that you actually do trust, that have proven their trust into the organization. So those next-gen firewalls, those IDS platforms, all those different things that we invest in to handle large volumes of traffic, we have found can be reduced down after a deployment of an effective zero trust platform. So those are other areas that can be pulled in and qualified. Like I mentioned, removing costly SD-WAN platforms, looking at those MPLS circuits, changing things out quite often and reducing the hardware deployments at these various locations can be a huge ROI. There's a wealth of different areas, not to mention the other stuff that happens inside an organization that adopts zero trust. I mentioned, reducing trouble ticket time, reducing onboarding time for new employees, reducing the staff hours that were needed to manage access inside the environment. I mean, huge ROI returns that are harder to quantify, but are equally out there just by implementing zero trust network access and microsegmentation. Those are huge wins inside your organization today. It's like cleaning up some of that tech debt that's been accumulating for decades.
Yeah, definitely. Couldn't agree more with some of those areas of ROI and recovery on those products. I definitely, Robert, I agree with you. We see it all the time. Buying a product for a single use when it covers 4 or 5 use cases. So totally understand that. We've got just a couple more minutes left. So I do want to skip over, we have a couple other questions, but I want to skip to one of the last ones and just kind of let you guys talk about what you're seeing in the industry. So what are you seeing as the latest trends and advancements in ZTNA and microsegmentation industry? You guys are really, I would say, both of you as organizations are on that bleeding edge of this technology. So what are you seeing as the things that are coming down the pipeline for this and the continued improvements? I know, Sean, you talked about machine learning. I'm sure everybody doesn't want the dirty word said, but AI, I'm sure, is being talked about with all of this as well. It's like, if it implements this easy with machine learning, we can call it AI and everybody will want to buy it even more. But, things like that. So what are you guys seeing from that perspective, the advancements in the industry?
So from us, from AppGate being a single platform, a single product company, what we've seen a responsiveness to, and I think Gartner actually called it out 2 years ago. Their recommendation is building with best of breed. So they've been recommending going away from single platforms that solve everything, especially in the large SASE arena. They recommend finding the best in breed for the elements that you need to compose and build out a zero trust architecture overall inside your organization. From our side of things, where we have seen strength is in the alliance partners. For example, partnering with companies like Guardicore, being able to exchange information at the API level, so a customer that has that loves it can talk. The same thing happens. That's what we're seeing the biggest trend in, is enabling customers that have made an investment to communicate with the platforms that they want to use for zero trust network architecture. Those have been the trends for us because we're solely about access. We don't look at the data at all. We don't inspect it. That's not the role that we play in the communications path. It's really about advancing our product, and we added the capability to bring in and automate adapters that used to take development hours. And so building out and making things easier for our customers, those have been the strengths that we've seen in changes in the industry, is just making it easier, because it used to be an onerous project, and easing that zero trust journey as much as possible and being able to integrate and leverage what they currently have on the table today. That's been what we've seen.
I think even though we might want to ignore AI and saying the word AI, because it's such a marketing word at this point, I don't think you can ignore it, and there's definitely a lot of potential in AI when you are looking, and this really comes into play obviously with microsegmentation and access, which is understanding what's normal traffic and being able to identify the abnormal traffic, even if you don't understand it. The other ways that we're seeing that being used, and I think this is going to be a trend that we're going to continue to see within a lot of security solutions, is using generative AI and large language models to be able to translate normal language into something that's more complex, so that you don't have to be a product expert to be able to do a query on a solution. So if you go into the microsegmentation solution, we actually have it in ours. You can simply just type in, show me any asset that has this vulnerability and is in this operating system. And you could type that in 4 or 5 different ways. It doesn't really matter, as long as it makes sense from a normal language perspective. And that gets translated into a query that the assets understand and can respond back to. So that reduces level of effort. It increases your efficiency. It means that you don't need security professionals, or you don't need people who are experts in products anymore. And I see that trend getting where we're starting to apply that with a lot of other solutions, where it's going to be easy. The idea is to make it easier to implement, easier to understand what's going on in the environment by doing things like large language models. I think that's where security vendors will apply AI first, and then we've been using machine learning and behavioral analytics when it comes to behavioral traffic behaviors and things like that. That's going to continue, and we'll obviously be looking at how can we utilize statistical and large language models to make that even easier.
Awesome. Well, with that, we're pretty much wrapped on time here. We've got about 4 minutes. So I wanted to take a moment to thank Sean and Robert from Akamai and AppGate for joining our panel today. Appreciate you guys both joining, and great input. Awesome to hear about where the industry for the ZTNA architecture and microsegmentation is going. Really appreciate that, gentlemen.
My pleasure.
Have a great one. Thank you.
Yeah, and then as well, I just wanted to take a moment to talk about a new web series that you may see some marketing material coming out from us about. We are doing vendor spotlights that will be next Thursday at the same time that these sessions run. It is purely a vendor spotlight, so it is a specific vendor. Next week will be a company called Thrive. They're an MSP, MSSP, security services provider. They will be providing about a 45-minute with 15-minute for question overview of who they are and what they do, and the customers that they work best with. So feel free to sign up for that as well. And then as always, around microsegmentation or security, ZTNA, any of these questions or areas that you might have that you want to get deeper with, whether you want to talk about that with myself or whether you want to talk with Sean or Robert from Akamai and AppGate, please talk to your trusted advisor. They will get you access to anything that you need, including the presentation today with the questions, the recordings of today's webinar, or any of the other information you need. I really appreciate it. Thank everybody for joining today. And we'll see you next month for our next series.
Thank you.